last week I gave Sharon her adjustment. It's really spin-off.
That story.
That's
Flowers.
Yeah.
Flowers, yes, I might play next round though.
Huh?
I think we missed the string.
Yeah, I didn't say that.
Ellie wins and beats whoever. No, I just won yesterday for Friday.
He's a Curtis thing.
No, I won my tournament on Friday. If I win today, if I win this matchup, I'm playing the winner of Ellie's game versus the winner of the winner of Yitzhak Sadia.
I mean, we're not
The whole together.
Wait, it's like
One of the four people.
win that game and then you get
No, the four people left.
Yeah.
The four people left. Yeah. Ellie, Yitzhak, Sadia, and Ina. So I'm gonna play one of them. Yitzhak finishes our round. Ellie finishes the round. You're Sadia and Ina. Then if only two people left, I'm gonna play one of those two.
Yeah?
Hopefully it's not
Ravi, you tried to flip it on me like, oh, I don't think I'm gonna make it today. But I make the check. You wanna come?
I'm glad Yitzhak. Very impressive. But Yitzhak, you have to tell it over to him. This type of thing could be very interesting.
Tell me he already knows everything about it. And I'm like, we should give it a share.
People aren't even busy on it, but when you get older, you realize when you're
Welcome.
it's only when you're in a public place where you show that.
Really?
I guess it's tall and skinny, you have to look really
Anybody more comments?
even though it is just
Really?
People showed up.
So the way I see
about 75.
The Jews?
Yeah.
Oh, the biggest showing ever.
That's amazing. We got more than 75 here.
When I woke up one time.
Someone told me that also. Yeah.
Okay, before we begin the actual share, though we might be on video, right? Or on video already? Oh, it doesn't help. But before it's on the recorder, at least, I'm going to use a lot, I'm going to say this in the share, but I'm going to use a lot of Hebrew words today due to the sensitive nature of the share. So Mechiyas Amalek means wiping out Amalek. Literally, that means to kill them. I'm just going to refer to it from this point on in the share as Mechiyas Amalek because I'm conscious of the World Wide Web and how things could travel all around. I'll also not be giving out my address.
Put that on the flyer.
Good morning.
The question, contact.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you all for coming from far and wide. Lichtman's even brought a guest from Vancouver. And Baruch Hashem, this is really the theme of the month of Adar, of connection between Jews from everywhere.
Farthest end, you wouldn't ever travel to this Jewish North America.
Really? Okay.
Over to Miami.
Vancouver to Miami. So, it's very interesting. I don't remember the other years shiurim evolving like this. But really this year, it has evolved the shiurim. One share led to another share, led to another share. They're all on different topics, but they were connected. All right, Berger, you get credit. We gave a share about parking next to a shul, which led to issues about driving recklessly. We had shiurim about tzitzis that led to tefillin. Last week we had a shir about Rav Gusman. And Baruch Hashem, it was well received. I had calls this week from Talmidim Rav Gusman that were very into the shir last week. And really, this shir is a spin-off of that, which I'll get to later. There is some story about Rav Gusman that really inspired the shir this morning too. Now, we titled today's shir, again, the term, the mitzvah of Mechiyas Amalek. Okay? V'amevin Yavin, what that means. Is it relevant today? Is the mitzvah of Mechiyas Amalek something which is relevant today? And a tie-in which really got me going when I decided on Thursday morning when I was up in Orlando that, okay, this is where we're going to give a share this week. What really was literally the final blow in deciding what the share is, the Makabah Patish, was when it started getting publicized that the anti-Semites around the world labeled this Shabbos as the day of hate. And, Baruch Hashem, Li'ayin Hara, Jews, we got through the Shabbos and we didn't really hear of much issues. I heard it brought a few extra people to some synagogues in Manhattan.
Temple Emmanuel had 75 people show up for Shabbos. You cannot make this stuff up.
Yeah. But it's eerie. It's eerie. It's funny. The meme that was going on last night after most, Baruch Hashem, Shabbos went without issues. People said that the day of hate was pushed off to the 13th and the 14th of Adar. And that President Biden says Jews are allowed to defend themselves. I'm not sure he would say that. But the concept, that we know as Jews, Halacha Esav Sones Yaakov, B'chol Dor V'Dor Omdim Aleinu L'Chalaseinu, these aren't, concepts in the Gemara that you think, nice theoretical concepts. Unfortunately, we get reminders every so often that doesn't matter what you look like, whether you look like a Hasidic person who was featured in an article in the New York Times, or if you affiliate with modern Orthodoxy and the YU, you also make it to the cover of the New York Times. They hate all of us. And it's a fact of life. And interestingly, there is this mitzvah, Mechiyas Amalek. The Torah describes that Amalek, this nation, has a sinah for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Unlike anyone else, there are Goyim, and then there's Amalek. Amalek's on a different plateau than everyone else. There's a history the Torah talks about. Amalek was the first nation to attack the Jews after the Jews went through the miraculous Yetzias Mitzrayim, and there was an awe that the world had, and nobody wanted to mess with the Jews. Nobody except Amalek. So that was the beginning of the battles with Amalek. We know the Purim story, which we're coming up to. Agag, the great-grandfather of Haman, was supposed to be wiped out. And unfortunately, there was a failure at that time in Jewish leadership of being fully Mekayim in the midst of Mechiyas Amalek. And that really gave us Purim. And all the dangers and the potential tragedies that Purim would have brought about really came from the lack of taking seriously enough this commandment of Mechiyas Amalek, of a misunderstanding of this commandment, Mechiyas Amalek. And therefore, today, we're trying to deal with this topic of Mechiyas Amalek, of is it relevant today? If it's a mistake that was made generations earlier that led to big problems, so, okay, is there any relevance for us today with this mitzvah? That is my first part of my introduction. I mentioned that Rav Gusman we spoke about last week. Tremendous tzaddik, the sweetest of people, as portrayed the story of the garden, the story of how he interacted with this Professor Alman, who was sitting Shiva. So many amazing things. Yet this same Rav Gusman, when he was a partisan fighting in World War II, escaping the Nazis, there's one story which I confirmed with the Talmud. That yes, he said he didn't hear it straight from Rav Gusman, but other Talmidim in Yeshiva did. Rav Gusman described how one point in his fleeing, he came across a Nazi, and he was sure that this Nazi was from Amalek, and he literally disposed of him with his bare hands. And after the exchange, he proudly told colleagues, I was just Mechiyas the mitzvah of Mechiyas Amalek. That's the story. No, obviously, you can't understand what people are going through during the war, but this is something which a great individual, Rav Gusman, it's a famous story that he expressed. So we'd like to look into today the halachic side of that. Where's the permissibility? Where does that come from? Is that a kiyum of it? Additionally, there's a concept, there's a mechilta, which I'll show you later, which says that Amalek cannot ever marry into the Jewish people. Amalek cannot join the Jewish people. Now that leads for a very interesting halakhic issue. What happens if someone from quote-unquote Amalek wants to be Megayer? They want to become a convert. Based on the Mechilta, it sounds like we would not allow them. So depending on who qualifies as Amalek, we might have practical halachic nafkaminas of gerus. If someone that fits into the category of Amalek is wants to join the Jewish people, can we turn them away? So I'd like to touch on all these topics in today's share, and we might find out some interesting new halachas. Yes. So we're going to talk about that. Is it a very clearly defined nation, hereditary? If you follow this to that, you become that. You're an Amaleki. Yes, we'll talk about that.
It's interesting how terrible Nazis' children could become. We've seen that.
Yes. Okay. Yes. So we will talk, about such cases. Would we accept a German, a Nazi, grandchild of a Nazi to be Megayer? Yes. We can talk about that. But,
doesn't it? I think it's a medrash. It's one of the Mefarshim that in the Haggadah, when we refer to the Bnei B'Seira, Shloshvei Bnei B'Ra, whatever, that they were descendants.
So we will talk about that.
So
Yes.
Seems like that's not a unanimous
Yes.
opinion.
So we will get to all these issues very soon. The first spot that I would like to go is the sheet of the chinuch. Let's start from there. It's actually the third Maramakum on the sheet, Os Gimel. The chinuch writes, this is mitzvah Tav Reish Daled, the mitzvahs of Mechiyas Amalek. For the record, very interesting. It seems through the ages, this Sefer HaChinuch was censored. And when you see what I'm talking about, you'll understand why. Now, Art Scroll has the mitzvah Sefer Chinuch translated to English. Nice volume. There are other Sefer Chinuch, one of those classic bar mitzvah gifts. They'll give a kid the Sefer. But I didn't check the Art Scroll English version what they do. But lines of the Sefer HaChinuch actually was censored because of this topic. But the Sefer HaChinuch writes, Yesh mitzvah kol yachid v'yachid. The mitzvah of Mechiyas Amalek, of wiping out Amalek, falls on every individual person. And the Minchas Chinuch, in explaining the Sefer HaChinuch, right, in parentheses, they bring down here that many early versions of the Chinuch, like I said, was censored. So they have a discussion about David Amalek, killing this person, the Ger Amaleki, the Navi refers to. David Amalek killed a person defined as the Ger Amaleki. So, easily, according to the Sefer HaChinuch, the Minchas Chinuch explains, you could justify that because every individual person has a responsibility, Mechiyas Amalek. If he understood that this person was Amaleki, then he fits into that category. And that's why David Amalek disposed of him. Yes?
So if I'm on my deathbed and I've never killed a person in my life, do I have to ask for Mechila that I never did this?
Okay, we'll get there. We'll get there. Now, I said, this is a loaded share today. Pun intended. Now, that's the Chinuch. The Chinuch is a Rishon, a major Rishon. But let's take a look at the Rambam on top of the page. The Rambam, the Rambam is actually at the end of his Sefer HaMitzvos, where he goes through the Mitzvah Asayis. So there, they bring from the Rambam, the Ein Chiyuv Mechiyas Amalek al Kol Yachim Yisrael, Ela Ala Klal. The mitzvah of Mechiyas Amalek is not an individual's mitzvah. The Jewish people in general, the Tzibor, has a chiyuv, has a responsibility to do this mitzvah, but no one individual person. That would come out, according to that a yachid does not have a mitzvah Mechiyas Amalek, and really seemingly should not do it. So yeah, this is not on your bucket list of things to do if you're a yachid, right? A bucket of cement, that is, right? This is not on anything that you have to do, right? You're not responsible for Jimmy Hoffa, right?
You gotta go to New Jersey for that.
What you have to do, right? This is a chiyuv on the tzibur. The tzibur has to do this. Really, based on that, they have to explain this Ger Maleki that David Melch killed was only because he was a Moed Malchus, he was a Rotzeach, but not based on the din of Amalek, because seemingly even David Amalek wouldn't be able to do this. This is a communal chiyuv, not an individual chiyuv.
It's also an if.
Yes.
It's also very much an if-then type of...
Yes. Additionally, another Rishon, the Yereim, Sefer Yereim brings down, the mitzvah Mechiyas Amalek tell us al Melech, below al Shar Yisrael. That the mitzvah Mechiyas Amalek specifically only applies to a king, but not on the rest of Klal Yisrael. This maybe is a spin-off of the Rambam. The Rambam is saying it's a communal responsibility. The Yereim is saying he's not necessarily defined as a communal responsibility, but the responsibility rests on the shoulders of the king and only the king. Now, this would justify David Amalek potentially doing it. Interestingly, this Shita of the Yereim comes up. I'll show you. If you look in the last few lines of the second to last paragraph on the bottom, this is a tshuva from Rav Volzner. He brings, there's a brisa in the Gemara Sanhedrin. Gimel mitzvos, nitzav Yisrael b'chanizim la'eretz limnos melech, limnos beis hamikdash, la'achrisu zara shel Amalek. There are three mitzvos that the Jewish people commanded upon entering Eretz Yisrael. One of them is to appoint a king. One of them is to build the base of Mikdash. And up there with those two big mitzvahs of appointing a king and building the base of Mikdash, right up there is Mechiyas Amalek. Hachid Zarat Amalek. And the pashtas and all those are not individual mitzvahs. Those are all tzibur mitzvahs. Those are maybe mitzvahs, once you have a king, he has a chiyuv to build the base of Mikdash. He has a chiyuv to wipe out Amalek. They say this will also potentially come to play as Hashem Mimosa Mashiach. We're going to have a king, Malcha Mashiach. We're going to have as Hashem a base of Mikdash be rebuilt, and also the Malcha Mashiach will have to finish off. Maybe it will be on your bucket list, but the mitzvah of wiping out Amalek is something that Malcha Mashiach will finish off. So he's the closer, literally. So you see from here, there's a three-way machlokas rishonim. The chinuch says every individual person has a chiyuv to do Mechiyas Amalek. So it would be on your bucket list. The other two shitas, the Rambam saying it's a communal chiyuv, so no one person could do it by themselves. It's a communal responsibility. And the Urayan that's saying it's specifically a responsibility on the shoulders of a king, then it wouldn't be relevant to individual people. Now, yes.
So today, when we have a Jewish state, Eretz Israel, so we actually have a government that responsibility falls on their shoulders for protecting Eretz Israel. We don't know what level we're at in terms of this leading to Yemos Mashiach. So is the obligation on or not? And when these Rabbanim wrote their perush, they had no idea that we'd ever have a Jewish state before Mashiach would come.
Right. The unfortunate, reality that was brought, the question that was raised was, okay, does the state of Israel have an obligation to wipe out Amalek? It's, the state of Israel is, a big bracha that we have the ability to live in Eretz Israel, but we don't necessarily view the state of Israel as the halachic epitome of what it means to be a Jewish state. But I don't know. In Netanyahu's mind, deciding if he should strike, Iran, we can talk. Does that have anything to do with Amalek? Maybe it's, but not Pashat. He definitely doesn't have a din of a melech, even though they call him King Bibi. Sorry, that's not a din of a melech. Now, what comes out, I believe, of these three shitos is it's a major machlokas rishonim. It does an individual have a responsibility to kill out to, I have to be careful what I say, with Mechiyas Amalek. Now, what really this does, it lends a question on the opening story. To say that some Rav felt that he was Mekayim this mitzvah of Mechiyas Amalek, okay, according to the chinuch, that might be true. But do we paskin like the chinuch? What about the Rambam shita? Most of the time we go after the Rambam. The Rambam says it's only on the tzibur. The Yereim says it's only on the melech. So does it really apply to individuals? Now, I made a list. I made a hit list of what I found in rabbinic literature. There are three big name gedolim over the ages who claim to have been mekayim this mitzvah of Mechiyas Amalek in modern times. Number one, I found the Chassam Sofer. Gives you new respect, huh? The Chassam Sofer in Pressburg. The Chassam Sofer claimed to have been mekayim this mitzvah of Mechiyas Amalek. Reb Chaim Volozhin. Luben said it might even be found in the Kar Baruch, historic sefer. But Chaim Volozhin was also supposedly involved with such an event. and the famous story that we just quoted before about Rav Kusman. All these stories, how do you understand them? Through the lens of the fact that it's only the sheet of the chinuch that says you're allowed to do it. What about the Rambam? What about the Yereim? We go with the chinuch. Safek nefashos lahakol. I don't know. But I'll show you some very interesting ideas. I found further upon research, there's a memra, there's a statement that's quoted in circles from the Brisker Rav. Excuse me, from going back and forth, one generation earlier. Chaim Brisker, right? One generation. Right? Chaim Brisker supposedly said the following idea, that not only is Amalek, this is a question Harvey just asked before, is Amalek one particular nation that child after child, ben achar ben, has this status for generations, or does it go beyond that? Chaim Brisker, the Shmuah says, is any enemy of the Jews. Someone who's an enemy of the Jews has the din of Amalek. That's a pretty far-reaching statement.
It's going to get pretty crowded.
Especially, right? Yeah, there's no room in that elevator, right? It's, according to Rabbi Chaim Brisker's statement, as is, it seems it applies to anyone who hates the Jews. And really, this interpretation could also be found in two other Dolim, two other Svarim. If you look in the Sefer Hamek Davar by the Netziv, in Sefer Shemos, Perak Yud Zayin, Pasuk Yidal, I didn't put all these Marmakomos on, at least I'll give you the quote, as well as Rabbi Chanan Wasserman in his Kovetz Mamarim. I found it in the ones after Yevamos, 10th one over there. But Rabbi Chanan Wasserman in both the Netziv, I'll tell you who, Tzvi Berlin. So I was about to say Rabbi Chaim Brisker, the Netziv, and Rabbi Chanan Wasserman all say that Amalek is not limited to child after child nationality. It applies to people who have a hatred of the Jews. Now, that's a pretty expansive definition. I saw within the Brisker circles, some of them debate, could Reb Chaim Volozhin, did Reb Chaim Brisker really say this or not? I saw Rav Sternbach in his Svar Modim Uzmanim brings this, seemingly accepts it. Seems like the Netziv, Rabbi Chanan understood it like this. I think Rabbi Chanan even talks about quoting the Chavetz Chaim. So there definitely are Rabbanim that have the opinion that Amalek is not even limited to one particular nation. It's people have a hatred for the Jewish people. Now, then I guess you would have a shayla. Let's say, okay, they have a hatred for the Jewish people. Let's say their grandkid doesn't. So do they fit into that category? Not. Is it hereditary that way? I don't know. Yes?
According to this, do we know who can be Megayer?
So that's a very, very interesting question. You're right. According to this broader definition, what Yanki's asking, according to this broader definition of Amalek, if Amalek does apply, then beyond, let's call it the Amalek nation, but it also applies to the haters of the Jewish people. So yeah, all the Day of Hater Rangers, right? The Goyim Defense League, the neo-Nazis, all these types of people would fall into this category of Amalek, and seemingly, yeah, it would be not so simple for them to be Megayer. You're right.
Why would they want to be?
Huh? If we just overwhelm them with,
Is there an opportunity at Tshuva?
huh?
Can they do Tshuva?
So we will talk about this. Yes.
That was sort of what I was going to ask. Louis had said there's a way to do tshuva. So 5 minutes ago he was Amalek, now he's not.
Yes.
Also, if you look in the Uraim, the second half of what he says,
Yeah.
It's only during Mashiach or Achar Kibush Haaretz. So,
Right. It's a din in the Melech.
So
Right. At certain times.
is he saying for everything or Legabe?
No. Even for Mechiyas Amalek. Right.
I mean, according to him, there would be no chiyuv at all nowadays.
Correct. Right. So again, you see from here, I'm taking you to both extremes. On the one hand, who is Amalek? You could find shitas that anyone who has real hatred of Jewish people fits into that category, not just one particular nation. That's the extreme of how far-reaching the definition of Amalek could be. But in terms of the mitzvah Mechiyas Amalek, you can see it be narrowly limited to the Uraim Shita, as Rachmil pointed out. It will be only a Melech has authority to do it, and only, within the time frame when the Melech is involved with Kibush Haaretz, building a base of Mikdash, these things will be allowed to do it. Beyond that, not. Or the Rambam Shita, that it's a Tzibor's responsibility. It's not on any one individual. So then that would seem limiting, that literally put handcuffs on a person. Yeah, it's not on you to be doing this mitzvah Mechiyas Amalek.
Who does it?
Huh?
What does that mean?
But I'll show you a interesting psak. Now, this Shabbos coming up is Parsha Zachar. And we gave a share last year, the year before, famous major issue, do women have to hear Parsha Zachar? One of the reasons brought down why women do not have to hear Parsha Zachar is Parsha Zachar is a mitzvah on men because men go out to war. Women do not. And therefore, since women do not go out for war, again, halachic issues, right? Since women do not go out to war, so Mamela, women are exempt from the mitzvah of Parsha Zachar. Parsha Zachar is a prelude to those who have the responsibility to go out to war. So a very interesting question I saw raised back in Europe. Shalta Tshuva's Binyan Shlomo was brought here. I found in Dirshu's Haaretz on the Mishabura. What about a Kohen? Kohen normally wouldn't go out to war. So following through from that logic, women are exempt because they don't go out to war. So you tell me a Kohen doesn't have to hear Parsha Zachar? Now a Levi, yes. But a Kohen, someone who's going out to war, okay, a Kohen's not in that category. So is this a good exemption? Kohanim don't have to hear Parsha Zachar. Parsha Zachar is the most important laning of the year. It's the only deraisa. So you tell me Kohanim don't have to hear it? So look what Reb Chaim Kanievsky writes. You see it in print. It's the third line of the Dirshu, Marmakom Dalid on the sheets. Going to Reb Chaim Kanievsky, who, by the way, his yurtzite's coming up on Shushan Purim. His first yurtzite. Hora, he paskin la'alacha, shekivam shemizdamin liyadayim Amaleki, below milcham. If Amaleki comes to the hands of a Jew, of a Kohen, even not Shas Milchama, hey mitzuvim lahargo, there would be within the mitzvah to do a mechiyah, a wiping out. That's why Kohanim have to hear Parsha Zachar. Since if a Kohen would have a situation, he's in a dark alley with Amaleki, now's his chance to do the mitzvah. Mamela, there's a chiyuv for Kohanim to hear Parsha Zachar. That means Reb Chaim Kanievsky is coming out with the tzad that it is an individual mitzvah.
Any woman could be
even for a Kohen. Huh?
Any woman could be in that same situation too.
No, but women don't have the mitzvah of Mechiyas Amalek.
I understand, but what I'm saying is, any woman could have that same situation too.
Why not?
Well, the Amaleki could come and be in.
Yeah. Now,
and she could,
right. Now, of course, there's a concept. I want to make it clear. Of course, there's a concept. If a person's ever in a challenging situation, Habal v'harcha, hashkem v'hargo, Hashem even applies to a Jew. If someone's threatening to take one's life, you're allowed to preemptively defend oneself and save oneself. So of course, yeah, those situations, of course, you could do it. Here we're talking even without one's life being in danger. There's a mitzvah of Mechiyas Amalek. Chaim Kanievsky is saying, practically, it's still relevant today, and that's why Kohen would also, he doesn't go out to war, but if he's in a situation, it is on his bucket list. Okay. I'll tell you, there's a funny story. I heard this from Rabbi Luban years ago. You know, back in the days, even in my days, she was in Forest Hills, which, relatively speaking, was, you know, a nice upscale neighborhood in Queens. But, you know, we still have problems with shkatzim. We use those words. And, you know, there'll be, you know, they used to go after us, you know. There was a park across the street from Yeshiva. There used to be issues. So in Williamsburg, when one Jew has issues, you use one Yiddish word, and it solves all your problems. Chapsim! Chapsim literally means grab them, but it's a phrase. Can you give us a chapsim? A chapsim. A chapsim. Right? You got to say it with the right Yiddish accent. But if you say chapsim, mamish, they come running. And you know now they officially have thugs. They have shomrim. They have, you know, guys that. But chapsim in Queens we didn't use such Yiddish. But you know there were rumbles. You know, they never knew. You mess with 2 Jewish kids in the park across the street, there's a whole base menace full of guys, you know, that you could go get. It seems, you know, there were times things got really, you know, nasty. Right? Luban tells stories. I was in charge of the baseball bats. he was right? I have to be careful what I say. Where Luban said he was the equipment manager. You know, like the Hatzal guy bringing out his bag? Right? Luban brought out the bag. Right? Well, Luban brought out the baseball bats. That's what he said. And there were stories. There's a story of a guy who after doing a number, was a black belt in karate, doing a number on somebody. Next thing he knew, he was visiting the yeshiva in Eretz Yisrael for the rest of his man. Maven Yavin. Like these are not, you know. Look, you know, we were taught that you have to stand your ground, and obviously you can't do stupid things. But sometimes people need to be taught a lesson. And there was a Maisa that there was a rumble going on by yeshiva, and I was actually going to call this person. I'm very close to this person. I was going to call him up. One of these older Yidden come out of the base medrash. Like, this is a person who mamish, like, you know, davens an hour-long Shmona Esrei, and like the most edel, skinny, you know, white-bearded man comes out, and you know, he sees the rumble. I thought what you might know of the story. And they say this older Yid in his heyday was a boxer. Okay. But anyway, they had some guy there on the floor, and he says,
Rabbi, today they're carrying guns.
Yes, you have to be smart. Moscow.
Yeah.
But the Italians of yesteryear in Forest Hills, this is what went down. And I was going to call him up to ask him, did you really think you were kind of mitzvah, Mechiyas Amalek, or shot? Right? I could have called his kids. His kids would be like, so I should call them after the share, I don't have a chance. But they'd be very into the show. But Rabbi Luban told us the story. Both of these stories I heard from Rabbi Luban. So it's a good source. Right? See, Harvey's careful. If he came to the share today, I'd be in trouble. But look, it's a machlokas rishonim. There's only the sheet of the chinuch is that it does apply to individuals. The Rambam and Yereim say not. Okay, now let's talk about gerus. And really, as long as you brought up this kasha, I gave a whole share on this the other night too. Very interesting kasha, especially for Purim. The Gemara in Gittin talks about improbabilities, things you never think would happen. One of the things the Gemara in Gittin, Daf Nun Zayin Amud Beis says that Bnei Banav Shal Haman were Lamdu Torah Bnei Brak. Haman's grandchildren, great-great-grandchildren, was sitting and learning Bnei Brak, Kol Chaznish, before that. They were learning in Bnei Brak. And the question begs, the time out. If you know someone is Amalek, clear Haman was direct descendant of Agag, he for sure was Amalek. Seemingly that means his kids are Amalek. We quoted, there's a Mechilta, it's on the top of your page, of the, not the, Os Hey, in the middle of the page. In Parshat B'Shalach, we see Melchama Hashem B'Amalek Midor Dor, Shem Mekabim Gerim Klam Amalek. We never accept Gerim from Amalek. It shouldn't be left, a kid, a grandkid, anyone from Amalek. And we learn from here, wipe them out, Kol Shekain, you can't bring them into Klal Yisrael. So one is not allowed to be Megayer Amalek. So how do we understand how Haman's great-grandkids were sitting and learning Torah? Don't tell me there were Gentiles learning Torah, because we don't do that. We don't teach them Torah. So how are Haman's great-great-grandkids sitting there? And there are different answers. There's one answer he found that they must have taken off their Hamantash, their triangle hats. They snuck into Bezdin. Bezdin didn't realize who they were. They're Megayer them. Once they're Megayer, so the halacha is, Gerish and his Gayer could cut and Shanolodami. Once you have the Gerus, you're a new person. So once they're in, they got their foot in the door.
How did David kill them?
Right? Good kasha. Yeah. But that's one answer people give. Another answer, they say, is if anywhere mixed in, it says, who said this is Haman's sons, from the genealogy of a son? Could have been from Haman's daughter. And even though by Judaism we define the person's status of being a Jew by the mother, by Gentiles it goes after the father. So if this was a descendant of Haman through his daughter, it wouldn't have been of Amalek. And therefore they would be allowed to marry the Klal Yisrael. It's another answer that's given. But they struggle with understanding, okay, how do you understand that Gemara? Not so simple. What I would like to deal with in the next 5 minutes is you look in the next Marmakom, in Oz Vav, where Vosner, the posek for Bnei Brak, I don't think he's Bnei Banav Shal Haman, though they do say who the Bnei Banav of Haman were. You never would believe. But that's for a different day. There's a Kabbalah, there's a tradition, Mehagra, from the Vilna Gaon. There are Germanim, Heim Mishorish Amalek. The Germans, forget about, because they hate Jews. In the lineage itself, Germans are Amalek. There's a Kabbalah from the Vilna Gaon of such a thing. And I even came across a story that the Kaiser of Germany came to Eretz Yisrael in 1898. That was already the time that Talmidei Agra already were living there, and in the early Yishuv in Eretz Yisrael, they had Yidden living there. And the question was, should people go out and greet the Kaiser? Should they greet him, this German Kaiser? And most of the Rabbanim of those times said yes. Shalom Malchus, we have to go, except one person didn't. Happened to be one of the chief Rabbanim of Yerushalayim, of Yosef Chaim Zonnenfeld. Yosef Chaim Zonnenfeld had a Masorah from his Rebbe, Rabbi Shua Leib Diskin, who seemingly traced it back to the Vilna Gaon, that the Germans were Amalek. And how could they go show kavod to Amalek? And he did not go. But this is a Masorah, this idea about Germans being Amalek is not so crazy, especially when you think of what they pulled off, which no other nation did the atrocities as much as they did. It's mind-boggling. And understanding it's part of a picture of Amalek, gives us a different understanding of what the mitzvah Mechiyas Amalek is. But anyway, the shaila is, can a German person who wants to be Megayer, would we accept him? And Rav Vosner over here in the Tshuva concludes that you would. And I think this is the formative halacha, this is the way people paskin. He gives a couple of reasons. Firstly, in general, we don't know nowadays, even way back from the Navi's times, from Sancheir's times, in general, for yichus issues, we say we don't know who a Mitzri is, we don't know who a Ammoni is, a Moavi. The nations are all mixed up. So to say that we know this is Amalek is very not simple. Okay, but the Gra says, we know there's a Kabbalah. He knows that the Germans, there were certain Simanim. He knew that they were Amalek. So he ends up paskening. He says, okay, but Lamaisa, the Rambam says, anyway, it's not a responsibility of individuals, it's a responsibility of the tzibur. And he utilizes that as a tzad, that we don't have to be choshes, the svek does this really apply, does it not apply? And Rav Vosner is comfortable accepting a German to be Megayer. He says if you do have a person who you could somehow define clear is an Amaleki, he says then I would be nervous and he would be koshish for the sheet of the Chiluk. Practically speaking, Rav Vosner does come out, despite the Masorah from the Gra, this Kabbalah from the Gra, that we would accept German people as Gerim. I actually know somebody whose daughter married a German Ger. So Vosner says you don't have to worry about anything. Possibly.
They have cases where the grandfather was an SS man.
Yeah.
And the grandson converts to Judaism.
There's a beautiful, there's a person, Rabbi Usher Wade. He's actually a very popular Torah of Yad Vashem, given that's by Rabbi Usher Wade. You can check him up. He was to be a German priest. And the fascinating story, after learning and going through, he became a Holocaust scholar and went through things, and they allowed him to have questions about his faith. And he researched and wasn't happy with the answers, and he was Megayer. And they accepted him in German. So B'nai Banav Shel Haman are Lomd Torah B'nai Brak, and B'nai Banav Shel Hitler, Yimach Shemo, are also learning Torah, according to this. So I think this is quite an interesting topic. Again, bucket list, I'm not sure it should be on there, different shitas, but L'maisa, it's an interesting part of Torah that is quite relevant for this time of year, whether we know it or sometimes our enemies remind us of it too. We should all be zocheh to have a safe, uneventful week, and Bez Hashem, hope to have a share about Purim next Sunday. Thank you very much for coming.